Once Jesus told his disciples a parable. He said that the kingdom of heaven is like a man who sowed good seed in his field. But while everyone was sleeping, his enemy came and sowed weeds among the wheat, and then went away. When the wheat sprouted up and formed heads, then the weeds also appeared. The owner's servants came to him and said, "Sir, didn't you sow good seed in your field? Where then did the weeds come from?" "An enemy did this," the man replied. The servants asked him, "Do you want us to go and pull them up?" "No," he answered, "because while you are pulling the weeds, you may uproot the wheat with them. Let both grow together until the harvest. At that time I will tell the harvesters, 'First collect the weeds and tie them in bundles to be burned. Then gather the wheat and bring it into my barn.'" Then he left the crowd and went into the house. His disciples came to him and said, "Explain to us the parable of the weeds in the field." And Jesus answered, "The one who sowed the good seed is the Son of Man. The field is the world, and the good seed stands for the people of the kingdom. The weeds are the people of the evil one, and the enemy who sows them is the devil. The harvest is the end of the age, and the harvesters are angels. As the weeds are pulled up and burned," he said, "so it will be at the end of the age. The Son of Man will send out his angels, and they will weed out of his kingdom everything that causes sin and all who do evil. They will throw them into the blazing furnace, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Then the righteous will shine like the sun in the kingdom of their Father. Whoever has ears to hear, let them hear." Now, as I look out on all of the things going on in the world right now, I am left with one conclusion. This world is messed up. It's not as it should be. I know that I'm stating the obvious here, but this world is messed up. We are told at the very beginning of the Bible, at the very beginning of the book of Genesis, that when God finished creating all that is in the world, God looked at all of creation and said, it was good. It was perfect, according to God's standards. It was ordered and beautiful with incredibly diverse animal species, and God was pleased with what God had created. But God wasn't quite finished yet. God decided to make human beings in God's image. And we are told again in the first chapter of Genesis that when God created humans, God looked at humans and said, "It is very good." Creation was at last complete and all was well. But God made a choice to grant us a gift that nothing else in creation was given. We humans were given the gift of reason and free will. God laid out the terms of this world, and we could decide if we would follow them or not. And we seem to have always thought that we could do it better. And the moment we decided that we knew a better way than God, and that we could find a better way to live our lives than God offered us, sin entered the world. Now, depending on your theology, you can look at all of the evil and sin in this world, and you can wonder where it originally came from. And you can even try to point to specific people. You can point to the devil, the personification of evil itself. Some may even try to point to God in some type of radical monotheism that says if everything came from God, then evil must have as well. But to ask from where it is that evil came may actually be a pointless question. It may be a question to which we will never have an answer, at least not one that we are satisfied with until we are in the very presence of God for eternity. We may simply have to accept that there is evil in this world. There's evil in other countries, certainly. We like to focus on that and not look inside. We may not be bombarded by threats from the outside in all the time, but we know that there are realities of evil very close to home, in our communities, our churches even, in our families. Many of us have had to come to grips with what's even inside of us, with the fact that we ourselves have the capacity to do truly evil things when we are angry and upset, and we often have difficulty keeping that side of ourselves at bay. Last week, I told you about a pizza with the pastor opportunity, a time of question and answer and discussion that I was privileged to have with children in our summer camp some years ago. Each age group was given the opportunity to ask one question, which is why we like to have open discussions as often as we can. Surely they have more questions than we've had time to discuss, and surely each of us has more questions than we will ever be able to discuss in a Sunday morning worship service or in a video like this one or a time of Bible study. But one question that has plagued people probably since the beginning of time, when we first became aware of the presence of our Creator, is if God is truly all-powerful and truly all-knowing and all-loving, then why doesn't God do something about all of the evil in this world now? I have not to this point found a satisfactory answer to that question, although many a theologian and philosopher and just everyday people have tried to answer it. N.T. Wright has said that surely we wouldn't want God to bring judgment and punishment upon all of the evil in this world, because God would not be able to stop with those obvious things that you and I would call evil, the things we see on the news. God, in all of God's righteousness, would certainly have to look inside each person, inside you and me, and bring swift and immediate punishment against each of us for the evil that so often lies within us. So thanks be to God for grace. In our passage this morning, Jesus seems to tell us that though judgment and punishment against evil, including every single cause of sin, is not always swift or immediate as we would like, it is certain. It will happen, and it will be God doing it. But we must be patient and endure. So here again we have a parable about a farmer who in our minds doesn't seem to know what he's doing. Just like last week when we read the parable of the sower who scattered seed on the path and on the rocks and among the thorns, and luckily some of it seemed to happen to land on good soil. Here we have a farmer who doesn't seem to know that your best bet is to pluck up the weeds as soon as you recognize them, because that will enable your crop to thrive. Instead, he leaves the wheat and weeds growing together, seeing what's going to come of it, and not until it is harvest time does he separate what's finally wheat and store it in the barn, and then take what is obviously weeds off to be burned. If you haven't thought about parables in a long time, remember that behind each story is a wonderful kernel of truth and wisdom about the way that God operates in this world. Luckily, Jesus, in this case, offers us an explanation. The wheat is the good crop of righteous people. The weeds grow up right beside them, those who are evil and live for sin in this world. The sower is God who created all that is, and the entire crop will be judged at the end of the age, which may come at the end of time in the form of a great eschatological apocalypse, or may come for each of us as individuals at the end of our own lives. And what's interesting is that commentators have suggested that when Jesus tells this parable, he's speaking of a weed that would have been known in that day by his audience called darned, or maybe darnal. It is a weed that when it is first growing looks exactly like wheat. You can't tell the difference between the wheat and the weed until both are grown. The same might be said for each of us. It's not that we are inherently evil, but we each begin with a clean slate and the capacity to do work for God's kingdom, to make this world a better place, and also the capacity to do things that spread evil and hate. Not until we are grown are we able to see which we have chosen. And even then, it can be difficult to discern those who are good from those who are evil, but God knows the heart. The audience to which Jesus is speaking, and the audience to which the Gospel of Matthew is written, would have known the presence of evil in their time. They saw the Roman government as the personification of evil on earth, and they prayed that God would at last rid them of its oppression and control. In Jesus' time, many of the Jews longed for a day when God would create a pure Jewish community, free from all other corrupting influences of the outside world. And whether they rose up in attempts to throw off Roman control, or if they sought to rid their synagogues of all that they deemed unacceptable or corrupting, Jesus seemed to say that their efforts are misguided. God does not rid the wheat field of the weeds. God does not gather up the plants producing good fruit and dig them up and replant them in a field of good soil, free from all agents of corruption. We are in the field as it is. It's not our job to root out evil from this world. Why? Because it would be impossible. And as we work to uproot evil in all of its forms, some of those who are good and righteous, maybe even us, would be hurt in the process. And God is not willing to sacrifice the good and the righteous in this world to get rid of a few weeds. At least he's not ready to do it yet. But in the end, when all is said and done, God will have God's way against all that is wicked in this world. We must certainly protect ourselves, and we must certainly work for justice wherever injustice is present. But ultimately, ridding the world of evil is God's job, not ours. Our job is to live out the gospel each and every day, accepting the fact that evil exists and wrong is often done, but the good God of all creation will ultimately win. We may have to come to a place of acceptance of the messed up nature of this world. We don't have to be okay with it or satisfied by it. We don't have to have all the answers as to why it is the way it is. We do have to live with the love of Christ in a way that seeks to right wrongs and shed light in the midst of darkness wherever we can. We have to work so that God's dream becomes a reality right where you and I are, and that earth looks more like the kingdom of heaven as much as possible. We do that work knowing that the work will never be finished by us. We allow the wheat to grow in our lives and in the world around us, and then we pass the work on to someone else, having faith that God will work through them until ultimately God takes care of it all. I'm reminded of a prayer that hangs on the wall of what some have called the community room in our church and others the gathering place on our campus. It is the room on the adult Sunday school hall where we gather for coffee before Bible study each week, and we form community. That prayer is called the Serenity Prayer. It was written by theologian Reinhold Niebuhr, and it says, God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. This prayer was adopted by the group called Alcoholics Anonymous, and that's why it's hanging on the wall in that room in our church. Each week, under normal circumstances, not the pandemic like we're in right now, on Mondays and Fridays, AA meets in that room. And I have to believe that for many of them, that's their daily prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Perhaps that should be each of our prayer each day as well, praying that we would be able to accept the messed up nature of this world, recognize the ways that we too have contributed to it, and have the courage to work for peace and justice as we are able, and leave the rest to God. But acceptance without clear answers is one of the most difficult things to achieve. We may never stop searching for answers to why evil exists and why God doesn't seem to do anything about it, at least not in a time frame that is acceptable to us. So perhaps our search should be for deeper faith that grants us the assurance that ultimately God is in control, and this crazy farmer might just know what he's doing. For me, it becomes a matter of what some call praying with your feet. You pray for faith and serenity and understanding and healing in ourselves and in the world, and then you get up and get to work. You hear the calling to do what you can, wherever you can, for whomever you can, for however long you can, so that this world is made a little bit better, knowing it'll never be perfect. The answers don't easily necessarily become clear, but the work of faithful living becomes enough.